Alright, today we're doing one of my all-time favorites, meatloaf. What's better than meat and loaf form? I'm going to use 2.5 pounds of ground chuck, which I think is the most flavorful. It's 80% lean to 20% fat, which is the ratio I suggest. Here's the real secret though. You gotta put some vegetables in your meatloaf to give it flavor and, more importantly, moisture. So all these ingredients will be on the site. But I got half an onion, half a bell pepper, 3 cloves of garlic, some carrots, some celery, and 4 mushroom caps. And what we're going to do, we're going to make a very fine dice out of those, almost a puree with our food processor. So that's the bad news. I never make you use this thing. So don't get mad, but for this recipe so important, so pull that out of your closet or out of your cupboard. I think it's on the cupboard on the left, behind the Tupperware. All right, dust that thing off, and I want you to pulse the vegetables on and off. By the way, cut them up first. All right, put them in hold. They're too hard, so cut them up in small chunks. Do a couple batches at a time, and you want it just like that. Look at that. Pay attention to that. See, they're very, very, very fine. Puree them, but not liquefied. Okay, so get them very small, but don't make a slushy out of it. We got almost a cup of breadcrumb. I have 1 whole egg, tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce. Worcestershire. You know what I mean. Teaspoon of dry Italian herbs. And here's the seasoning mix. I go with 2 teaspoons of salt, 1 teaspoon of black pepper, and 1/2 teaspoon of cayenne. Now again, that's based on the 2.5 pounds of meat. Preheat your oven to 325 and let's get mixing. So there's my 2.5 pounds of chuck. Now I have a method where I like to mix in the wet ingredients. Give it a little mix first, then I'll mix in my breadcrumbs. Okay, so dump in your veggies, and again you want to make sure those are nice and fine. If you got big chunks of carrot and onion, those are just not going to cook enough, and you're going to bite into them, and it's not going to pleasant. Dump in your Worcestershire. The sauces starts with W. Alright, we're going to put in our egg, and again I just gave it a little beating with a fork. So that's 1 large egg. Alright, you going to dump in your teaspoon of dried herbs. Now again I'm using a classic Italian mix: thyme, basil, rosemary, marjoram, etc. You can use any dry herb you like. In fact, no, you can't use the one I'm using. And there's my spice mix. Again, 2 teaspoons of salt. Again, in general it's about a teaspoon of salt per pound of meat for this type of stuff, so I went with 2 teaspoons of salt for 2.5 pounds of meat. Should be just about perfect. I gave it about a minute. Mix with a wooden spoon. Then I dumped in my almost cup of breadcrumb, and now I'm going to go bare hand on this meatloaf, and I'm not going to use 2 hands and attack it and it be violent. I'm going to gently with my fingertips, almost lovingly, mix in the breadcrumbs just until it comes together. You don't want to overmix your meatloaf. You'll have tough meatloaf. We want tender meatloaf, so be tender when you mix in the breadcrumb. And you can tell in a mix, basically the breadcrumbs just disappear and form it into ball. Again, that took me maybe a minute and a half to mix with bread crimson. Some people need that thing for 10 minutes and then they wonder why their meatloaf is tough. Alright, I'm putting just a couple drips of olive oil in my baking dish. Some use some with the sides that has a little bit of a side to it. It's, you know, good amount of fat's going to drip out of this and you want to run it all over your stove. So, go ahead and take your ball of meat and form it into a meatloaf. Now I dip my fingers in cold water. Wet cold fingers don't stick to me. It's proven culinary fact, so this lets me shape this very easily without a lot of mess. And I'm going to go about 4 inches high by about 6 inches across. Okay, I think that's going to cook nice and evenly. And again, my cooking times I'm giving you are based on the shape, so if you put this in some kind of mold or something, you're going to have to make sure you check your internal temperature at the end. But I want it nice and smooth. I want it nice and even, just not so much for looks, but so it cooks evenly. Now we're going to give it a pre-baking 15 minutes at 325. Then we're going to put a glaze on it. So while that's baking for 15 minutes, we're going to make a very simple glaze. That's 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. Alright, about a tablespoon or 2 of ketchup. And of course, exact measurements don't really matter here. It's just a nice kind of sweet sour glaze for the top. This is a classic mustard ketchup brown sugar. Alright, about big spoon of mustard. I'll put the measurements on site like I say. By the way, if you're only watching this on YouTube, you're missing all the good stuff. Go to foodwishes.com for the story for the ingredients. Alright, I give it a shot of hot pepper sauce. I'm using an Asian sriracha sauce. You can use just regular Tabasco, and that's it. Just a real simple glaze to put on top of that meat. So, after 15 minutes I pulled it out of the oven. Dump my glaze on top. Alright, so I'm going to start with the top like I'm doing a cake. Don't go down the side yet, because what will happen is it's all drip down and burn out to the bottom of the pan. So, get it all on the top. Once that's on the top, pull a little bit down with the back of the spoon and just give the size a little bit. So you want the glaze mostly on top, so when you slice it you got that nice red ring, and then you're going to put back in the oven. We're looking for an internal temperature of 155. Use your thermometer. It's going to be about 3035, maybe 40 minutes, depending on the size and how you shaped it. That's what it look like when it's done. You know what have been a great idea? Put some foil in the pan. Too late. So anyway, that cook for about 35 minutes. 155 gives you a perfect doneness. Let it cool before you slice it. Otherwise you lose all those juices, but can actually see those little speckles of vegetables in there. That's what keeps it very moist and very flavorful. Just a beautiful dinner. I went very classic here. Mashed potato, buttered peas, my top secret mushroom gravy / sauce that I will show next week sometime. So if you're tuning in you'll see that really nice recipe, but that is just one of my favorite dinners of all time, and meatloaf is so easy to make. There's no excuse to make bad meatloaf. What people call meatloaf is actually just a giant baked hamburger. You gotta get the veggies there for the moisture and so forth. So I really Hope you give this a try and enjoy.